describes what happened next. During season 2 of the show, Kim opened up about the tragedy more than ever before. She even admitted,
"If there is one moment in my whole life I could
His
live over..."
name was Joshua Samuel Plath. He was 17 months old. And what happened to him on a September afternoon in 2008, and what his family did and didn't say about it for the 16 years that followed, is one of the most quietly devastating stories hiding inside one of reality television's most scrutinized families. This is everything they've finally said. And it is nothing like what you'd expect. To understand why Joshua's death sits at the very core of the Plath family story, you first have to understand the world he was born into. Barry and Kim Plath built their life on a rock-solid foundation of unwavering faith. In every aspect of their daily lives, raising their children, working the rural Georgia farm they called home, homeschooling, even managing the family band, the Plath parents trusted their faith in the Lord to guide them in all matters big and small. They were, by every outward appearance, a family sealed off from the chaos of the modern world. Sheltered, purposeful. Anchor Joshua Samuel Plath was the seventh child born to Kim and Barry. He was born on April 15, 2007. He came into a household already full. Ethan, Hosanna, Micah, Mariah, Lydia, and Isaac were already running through those fields. And Kim was pregnant with her 8th child at the time of the accident. Life on the Plath farm in the fall of 2008 was busy and loud and full of the specific beautiful chaos of a large family. Joshua was not yet 2 years old. He had no idea, of course, that he was living inside what would one day become a national conversation about faith, control, family trauma, and the cost of silence. He was just a toddler, 17 months old, tumbling around a Georgia farm on a warm September day, and then, in one terrible moment that lasted only a second, everything changed. Not just for him. For all of them. Forever, what happened that afternoon has been reconstructed piece by piece. From Sheriff's Department records, from Kim's own written words, from Barry's statements on camera, and most recently from Lydia's raw, almost unbearable account on a podcast that left millions of people stunned. Kim and the family were doing yard work. It was, by all accounts, a normal day on the farm. The kind of day that exists in photographs. Golden light, wide open land, children scattered across the property. Kim was moving fruit trees using the family vehicle. She had done it before. She knew this land. She knew these children. The mother was pulling the vehicle forward. She had been doing yard work and thought she had accounted for all the kids. Investigator Daniel Singletary of the Grady County Sheriff's Office told the Thomasville Times-Enterprise in 2008. She had 7 children, ages 15 months to 10 years old, and they were all outside playing. She thought everyone was accounted for, moved the vehicle forward, and discovered she'd run over the youngest. Kim herself described the moment in devastating detail on an episode of their TLC series years later. "I pulled a vehicle forward. I had just seen him. So I thought I was okay, but I pulled forward and I ran over him. And the ambulance comes and we're all just praying, crying, and the lady came. She took him to the ambulance and she came back and she said, 'I'm sorry.' Kim tried CPR. EMTs took over when they arrived. But it was too late. Soap dirt. Joshua's cause of death was listed as head injuries. The death was ruled accidental. Yahoo! Barry rushed home from work. But poor Joshua had passed away before he arrived. The list. Now here is the detail that doesn't appear in most of the coverage. The detail that, when Lydia finally spoke it aloud in 2026, hit audiences like a freight train. She was 4 years old. And she was in the car when it happened. "I was in the car when it happened," she told podcast hosts Matt and Abby Howard. "My mom, she freaked out, got out, pulled him out from under the car. And then her and all my siblings ran to the house to grab the phone. Isaac and I, my younger brother, were in the car. And I got out, I saw him, and it was just terrible. I just told Isaac, 'Don't look. Just get out the other door. We've gotta go.'" Those details I remember too well. A 4-year-old girl telling her 2-year-old brother not to look. At their baby brother. On the ground. That image. That act of instinctive protection from a child who was barely more than a toddler herself will stay with you. Here is where the Plath story becomes something deeper than tragedy. Here is where it becomes a study in how grief, when it has nowhere to go, becomes architecture. It becomes the shape of a family. Kim described the months after Joshua's death as hell on earth. She said Barry was dealing with losing a son and losing a wife. I was there, but I wasn't there. In a heartfelt essay, Kim wrote that she lived the next hour nonstop in my brain for the next 8 months. She later admitted, I probably am my biggest accuser, and that was a battle that I dealt with the first year that he died. I was pretty much just shut down, and because Kim was shut down, because the grief had swallowed her whole, an unspoken rule descended on the Plath household. You did not talk about Joshua. Not around Mom. Not at all, really. Because to talk about him was to crack open something that felt like it might never close again. As Lydia explained through tears, our household wasn't necessarily one to just talk about everything and be vulnerable. When that happened, we didn't know how to talk about it. And especially with it being in the hands of my mom, we weren't going to dare talk about it around her. She recalled one heartbreaking early memory. I remember very vividly when I was still 4, asking questions about Joshua to my dad instead of my siblings. We started talking about it, but then Mom walked in the room and he was like, we can't talk about this anymore because she was there. And we just couldn't talk about it around her. So the one time I remember trying to talk about it, I couldn't. Mariah, who was 6 years old when Joshua died, was standing nearby when the accident happened. Think about what that means. 6 children, ranging from 10 years old down to infants, witnessed or were near an event that would mark them for the rest of their lives. And the family's collective response was to seal it. Not from cruelty, from survival. Because the woman at the center of their world was drowning, and they all knew it. Lydia saw the long shadow of that silence reaching far beyond Joshua's memory. With us not talking about the hardest thing in our childhood, it kind of just bred that, in general, we just don't talk about hard things. And I can't imagine how that affected my parents. Just not facing the hard things, not talking about the hard things, and kind of having to shut off your emotions a little bit because it's too painful to feel again. She wasn't just talking about Joshua anymore. She was talking about a family that learned, in the aftermath of the most devastating thing that can happen to a mother, that feelings were something you locked away. And that lesson, grief unexpressed, silence enforced, rippled through every relationship, every conflict, every rupture that viewers would later watch play out on TLC for 4 seasons. The Plath family didn't go public with their story until 2019, when Welcome to Plathville debuted on TLC. And when they did, when Kim and Barry finally spoke Joshua's name on camera, it became one of the most quietly devastating moments in reality television history. Barry looked directly at the camera and said, Joshua died, and it was an accident. Just a terrible accident. 5 words. 11 years of weight behind them, the show also brought something else. A chance for the first time for these children to visit Joshua's grave together. In one episode of their reality series, the family visited Joshua's grave to pay their respects. In a 2022 episode, the family reunited at Joshua's gravesite on what would have been his 15th birthday. Lydia later revealed that she didn't visit that grave until she was 9 years old. Because it was just too hard to go back to. Imagine being a child who lost a sibling and spending 5 years unable to stand at his grave, not because of distance, because of the magnitude of what happened there. Because that place and that Georgia earth held something too enormous to face. The most recent and perhaps most significant chapter in this story arrived in January 2026. Newly married Lydia Plath and her husband, Zach Wise, appeared on the Unplanned podcast hosted by Matt and Abby Howard. And what Lydia said, tearfully, carefully, with remarkable clarity, reframed the entire Plath family narrative. When asked how the family navigated the tragedy, Lydia linked Joshua's unprocessed death directly to the breakdown of her parents' marriage. Honestly, I think that has more to do with my parents' divorce than the show. That is not a small statement. That is a daughter saying, on record, publicly, that the grief that was never spoken, the loss that was never properly mourned together, may have quietly eaten away at the foundation of a 20-year marriage. That Kim's guilt and Barry's helplessness and the family-wide vow of silence around Joshua's name may have done as much damage over time as any disagreement over rules or religion or the children leaving home. Grief that has nowhere to go doesn't disappear. It moves through walls. It sits at dinner tables. It sleeps in the same bed as people who have stopped being able to talk to each other. And yet, despite all of that, Lydia ended her account of Joshua not in darkness, but in something closer to peace. "I am blessed to remember some moments of his childhood too," she said. "That detail matters. Because after everything, the accident, the silence, the childhood spent navigating a mother's grief and a family's unspoken rules, the years of not being allowed to say his name in certain rooms, what Lydia chose to carry forward was gratitude. That she had known him at all. That she had 17 months of a little brother. Here's what this story is really about. It is not about a television show. It is not about ratings or drama or the spectacle of an unconventional family. It is about what happens when a family faces the unsurvivable and survives it anyway, but pays a price for how they did it. Joshua Samuel Plath lived for 17 months. He never saw his first birthday on camera. He never grew up alongside his siblings on TLC. He is a grave in Georgia, a name finally spoken aloud, a photograph on a family website, and the answer to a question his family spent years unable to ask each other. His sisters have said it now, plainly and on the record. After Joshua died, nobody would talk about it. Like it was something that didn't happen. It did happen. It happened on a warm September morning in 2008 on a Georgia farm, in a family who loved each other and were not prepared, because no family ever is, for the second it takes for the world to change without warning. The Plaths are still reckoning with it. And in their willingness to finally say his name, on podcasts, on camera, in tears, at grave sites, there is something that looks, slowly and imperfectly, like healing. Joshua would have been 19 years old this year. She wrote it on a website that no longer exists. As if even the internet knew those words were too heavy to hold permanently. As if the server itself decided, at some point, quietly, without ceremony, that what a mother wrote in the darkest season of her life was not meant to live forever in a searchable database. It was meant to be released. Let go. The way you eventually have to let go of the rope you've been white-knuckling since the worst day you've ever lived through. Kim Plath wrote, "I lived in hell on earth. I woke up every morning and functioned. But just barely. I wanted to die." That sentence has been quoted, screenshotted, and passed around the internet by people who watched a TLC reality show and thought they knew this woman. They thought they knew her as the controlling mother, the woman with the rules, the matriarch who wouldn't let her children eat sugar, or watch television, or engage with the outside world. They did not know this version of her. The one kneeling on a Georgia farm. The one who, "I woke up every morning and functioned. But just barely. I wanted to die," Kim wrote. "My husband was dealing with losing his son and his wife. I was gone. Checked out. Unavailable for conversations or reality." Read that again slowly. She was not describing sadness. She was describing total psychological collapse. The kind of dissociation that happens when the brain cannot reconcile what the body has done. She was there, physically present in her home, cooking meals, existing in a house full of children who needed her, and she was, at the same time, completely unreachable. Kim also admitted something that very few people in her position would ever say publicly. She admitted that if the accident had happened in reverse, if Barry had been the one driving that day, she knows how she would have reacted. She wrote that she would have thrown accusations his way, that she would not have given him the grace he gave her. Think about how much self-knowledge that requires. To be inside the worst period of your life and to simultaneously have the clarity to recognize, "I would not have been as good to him as he is being to me." That is not a woman without depth. That is a woman being ruthlessly honest with herself at a moment when most people only have room to survive. Barry, she wrote, never made her feel more guilty than she already did. He never did. He never even hinted at anything like that. He was strong. He just loved me. She closed the essay with something that sounds almost impossible given everything she described, but which she wrote nonetheless. God has been so faithful to our family for getting us through such a horrific event. He has indeed fully restored our joy. And we are forever grateful. Whether that restoration was complete or permanent, or whether joy restored is different from wound healed, that is a question the years since have quietly answered. Because the same woman who wrote those words would later stand in a kitchen on a reality show and explain a toddler's death to her youngest daughters, would later sit across from cameras and describe the months after as hell, would later watch her older children go on podcasts and describe the silence she enforced, not from cruelty, but from a grief so consuming it swallowed the whole household. Joy restored. But some things you now know were still not spoken for a very long time. Barry Plath does not speak in dramatic paragraphs. He is not a man who performs emotion for an audience. In every piece of footage, every interview, every confessional in the TLC series, he comes across as someone who carries things internally, steadily, almost stubbornly, the way a man does when he has decided that falling apart is not something he can afford to do. When Joshua died, he was at work. He rushed home. But poor Joshua had passed away before Barry arrived. He never got to hold him one last time while he was still warm. He never got to say goodbye. He came home to a farm, a wife who was already gone inside herself, and children who needed someone to remain standing, and he stood. For years, the public narrative around Barry, filtered through the lens of a reality show that framed him as a co-author of an unusually strict household, missed this entirely. Viewers watched him navigate his crumbling marriage to Kim, his relationships with adult children who were pulling away from the life he'd built, the slow dissolution of a family structure he had organized around faith and proximity. They formed opinions. Strong ones. But in a 2022 confessional that stopped a lot of those viewers cold, Barry looked at the camera and said 9 words about his son that carried 25 years of weight. He lived a short life, but he made a big impression, Barry said. His memory lives on through the older children into the younger children. 9 words for 17 months of life. But there was nothing casual about them. They were the words of a man who had thought about exactly this, exactly how to say it, how much to say, how to compress a grief that has no proper shape into something that could exist in a sentence without breaking him. His memory lives on through the older children into the younger children. That is not just an observation. That is a father describing the only form of continuity available to him. That Joshua exists still in the people who remember him, passed down, carried forward, whispered about at gravesites and in kitchens and on podcasts, because there is nothing else left. There is a particular kind of psychological injury that comes from witnessing something traumatic as a child. It is not the same as experiencing it as an adult. When a child sees something that shatters the world, the brain doesn't have the framework to contextualize it, to file it away neatly, to build a wall around it. It just lives there, in the body, in the peripheral vision, surfacing at unexpected moments for the rest of your life. Lydia Plath was 6 years old on September 19, 2008. She was close enough to see everything. She told viewers of Welcome to Plathville that she still struggles with what happened. I watched it all happen, so sometimes I'll still remember that like it was yesterday, like a flashback. That word, flashback, is not used carelessly. It describes an involuntary, visceral re-experiencing of a traumatic event. It describes the brain pulling someone back without permission. Decades later, on an ordinary Tuesday, without warning. And like Lydia, Mariah described the silence that followed. After Joshua died, nobody would talk about it. Like it was something that didn't happen. The Ashley's Reality Roundup. Something that didn't happen. Those 4 words are doing enormous emotional work. Because for a 6-year-old who had just seen what Mariah saw, being told through the family's collective silence that it didn't happen, that it couldn't be spoken about, that the name was too dangerous in certain rooms, must have created a bewildering cognitive dissonance. You watched it. You know it was real. And yet the household around you is functioning as if it wasn't. What does that do to a child's relationship with reality?